My name is Logan and I'm 28 years old. Even now, the memory feels distant, like watching a film of someone else's life. Yet the chill of that lawyer's office still creeps into my bones. You know those moments that feel predestined, carved out of the ordinary fabric of time to stand stark and unforgettable? That day, when I walked into the hushed, almost funereal silence of Miller and Finch, felt exactly like that. I remembered the heavy mahogany door, the scent of old paper and stale coffee, the way my worn sneakers scuffed faintly against the plush carpet. It was all so incongruous with my life back then, a life of ramen noodles and chasing freelance gigs, always on the edge of just enough. I had received the formal letter weeks prior, a stark white envelope among a pile of bills, summoning me to the reading of my Uncle Silas's will. Uncle Silas. The name itself felt like a ghost, a whisper from a past I barely remembered, shrouded in childhood memories of his eccentric stories and the faint smell of pipe tobacco. We hadn't spoken in over a decade, not since my parents had a bitter falling out with him over some forgotten family slight. I honestly hadn't even known he was still alive until that letter landed. Seated around the large polished table were faces I recognized from faded holiday photos. My Aunt Carol, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and a permanent scowl. My cousin David, a man whose tailored suit seemed to scream, "Entitled," and a smattering of other distant relatives, all with the same air of expectant entitlement. Their eyes, heavy with disdain, flickered over me the moment I stepped into the room, an almost palpable wave of judgment washing over my slight frame. A low murmur rippled through them, like stones skittering across ice. My heart began a slow, dull thrum. "Is that Logan?" Aunt Carol whispered, though it was loud enough to carry across the room. David snickered, a small, unpleasant sound that made my jaw clench. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. Thought you'd actually show up." His tone was laced with an undeniable condescension, a sneering dismissal that made me want to shrink into the heavy drapes by the window. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a familiar flush of embarrassment and anger. I simply nodded, finding my designated chair at the far end of the table, as far away from them as possible. My hands trembled slightly as I rested them on the cool wood. Every eye followed me, their stares like physical weight pressing down. They weren't just curious. They were openly mocking, certain I was an interloper, a hopeful pauper grasping at the last crumbs of a rich man's legacy. I could almost hear their silent thoughts. What could he possibly be hoping for? Silas barely remembered him. The air grew thick with unspoken derision, each breath I took feeling heavy and unwanted. "Good afternoon, everyone." A brisk, professional voice cut through the tension. Mr. Davies, Silas's attorney, adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sweeping over the assembled family. He was a small man with an impressive head of white hair, holding a thick leather-bound folder. He glanced at me, a brief, unreadable flicker in his eyes, before settling on the room. "Thank you for coming. As you know, we are here today for the reading of Mr. Silas Blackwood's last will and testament." The rustling of papers was the only sound for a moment, then a soft, expectant cough from Aunt Carol. The quiet anticipation in the room was almost unbearable, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. "Mr." Davies cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the expectant quiet, and adjusted his glasses. He began to read, his voice surprisingly robust for such a small man, detailing bequests of property, a significant trust fund, and shares in various companies. Each word felt like a carefully placed stone in a grand towering edifice, but one that I had no part in building. The first substantial mention, as expected, was for my Aunt Carol. "To my sister-in-law, Carol Blackwood, I bequeath the family estate in Vermont, along with a sum of $2 million and all my shares in Blackwood Textiles." A small, triumphant smile played on her lips, a smug, "I told you so," silently directed at anyone who might have doubted her standing. She even let out a little, almost imperceptible sigh of relief, as if she'd been holding her breath for years. Then came David's turn, which was equally generous. "To my nephew, David Blackwood, I leave my country residence in upstate New York, along with a portfolio of diverse investments valued at approximately $3 million, and my collection of antique watches. He smirked, a flicker of genuine greedy satisfaction in his eyes as he subtly adjusted his expensive watch, an ostentatious piece I knew cost more than my entire year's income. I merely watched, detached, tracing patterns on the polished wood table with a finger. My own name hadn't been mentioned, of course. Why would it be? I was just a footnote, an unwelcome relic of a forgotten past. Someone whose invitation was more an administrative oversight than a genuine act of remembrance. The air seemed to thicken with their silent celebrations, a suffocating blanket of their collective triumph that pressed down on me. I felt the weight of their expectations, the quiet certainty that I was utterly irrelevant to this grand unfolding. Mr. Davies paused, turning a page with a soft rustle, and continued. And to my beloved niece, Ilara Thompson, I bequeath my collection of first edition novels and a trust fund of $500,000. My head snapped up, not for myself, but another name. Another reminder of how many people Silas had in his life, how few remembered me. A pang of something close to loneliness echoed inside me, a familiar sting of being utterly invisible amidst the legacies being parceled out. Each pronouncement of another name, another inheritance, was a chisel chipping away at any lingering foolish hope I might have harbored, confirming the narrative the family already believed. Quite generous, Aunt Carol interjected, her voice dripping with approval, as if confirming the testator's good taste in beneficiaries. Silas always knew how to take care of his family. She shot a quick, almost imperceptible glance my way, a subtle movement that still managed to convey her deep-seated judgment and dismissal. David merely nodded, his eyes already lost in the distant future where these new assets solidified his already privileged position. They were utterly absorbed in their gains, their faces alight with a self-satisfied glow. I had expected nothing, yet the formal, methodical exclusion still managed to prickle at my skin. My gaze drifted to the window, the overcast sky mirroring the gray landscape of my own expectations. I was ready for this charade to end, ready to slip back into the anonymity from which I'd briefly emerged, to forget the uncomfortable stares and the cold, hard reality of my non-place in this family's saga. The legal jargon continued, a droning backdrop to my internal monologue of acceptance and quiet resignation. Each article of the will, each named individual, cemented the chasm between them and me, a gap so wide I wondered why I had even bothered to cross it. Mr. Davies continued his monotonous reading, detailing bequests of antique furniture and a rare stamp collection to distant cousins. Each mention solidified my irrelevance, adding another layer to the thick wall of indifference from this family's legacy. My mind had retreated, counting down to my polite exit. The room's air felt heavy with their collective satisfaction, a palpable sense of closure for everyone but me. I just wanted to disappear, an unwelcome ghost among the airs. Honestly, what's he still doing here, hoping for a forgotten antique spoon? Aunt Carol whispered, her voice carrying clearly. David chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. His eyes met mine, a glint of pure malice. Maybe he thinks Silas left him his old fishing hat, he drawled, loud enough for most, earning stifled titters. The laughter, soft but piercing, stung deeper than any shout, a quiet confirmation of their shared contempt. It reduced me to an unwelcome shadow. A hot flush crept up my neck, burning my ears with humiliating heat. I was utterly prepared for the lawyer to close the folder and end my torment. But Mr. Davies didn't. He merely adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sweeping the faces with a peculiar, almost knowing glint. His posture shifted, subtly, from a formal recitation to something more deliberate, personal. A palpable pause, a hesitation that broke the last hour's rhythm, descended. An almost electric silence crept into the room, replacing the family's satisfied murmurs. This wasn't the end. It was something else, something I couldn't grasp. My heart, just slowing, jarred. The collective anticipation in the room shifted, turning, like a reluctant spotlight, towards me. Mr. Davies finally settled his gaze on me, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, a striking contrast to the stern solemnity he'd maintained for the last hour. My breath hitched. "Mr. Logan Blackwood," he began, his voice taking on a new, deliberate resonance that cut through the stifling quiet. "Your uncle, Silas Blackwood, made a rather unconventional provision for you." The words hung in the air, a tiny, almost insignificant tremor that nonetheless sent shivers down my spine. I gripped the cool wood of the table, my knuckles whitening, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Unconventional. What? Did he leave him his collection of mismatched socks and a lifetime supply of instant coffee? David sneered, his voice dripping with venomous amusement, drawing snickers from some of the distant, lesser relatives huddled near the door. Aunt Carol, however, looked genuinely affronted, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching dramatically. "Honestly, Mr. Davies, must we endure this charade? It's clearly some sort of whimsical joke, a sentimental trifle. Just get on with the final beneficiaries so we can all leave." Her impatience was a tangible force, pushing against the lawyer's calm demeanor. Mr. Davies held up a hand, silencing them without raising his voice. His eyes, though, narrowed slightly as he looked at Aunt Carol, a flash of something akin to reprimand in their depths. "On the contrary, Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Silas Blackwood was a man of vision, always ahead of his time. He believed in personal growth and, shall we say, a certain modern approach to legacy. To Logan, his nephew, he bequeathed not a specific sum or property outlined in the conventional sense, but rather something far more unique and, dare I say, potentially significant." He paused, letting the statement hang, a tantalizing bait in a room full of sharks. My stomach churned, a knot of confusion and a flicker of bewildered hope. What could be so unique that it wasn't simply listed? What kind of game was Silas playing from beyond the grave? The family's initial snickers had died down, replaced by a tense, resentful silence, their collective disbelief palpable. They wanted him to finish, to expose what they assumed would be my ultimate humiliation, to confirm their long-held narrative of my worthlessness. The pressure in the room mounted, a suffocating weight of expectations from every corner. "Specifically, Mr. Davies continued, his voice now crisp and precise, "Mr. Silas Blackwood, in an addendum to his will dated only a month before his passing, explicitly directed that Mr. Logan Blackwood be presented with this." He reached into his leather folder, not for another document, but for a small dark object. With a dramatic flourish that seemed entirely out of character for the usually stoic lawyer, he placed it onto the polished table, directly in front of me. It was a sleek black USB drive, no larger than my thumb, its surface glinting under the artificial light. A gasp rippled through the room. Aunt Carol scoffed, a loud, theatrical sound. "A USB drive? This is the grand, significant inheritance? My word, Silas must have lost his mind completely in his final days." David erupted in full, unrestrained laughter, a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the mahogany walls. "Is this a joke? He left him a thumb drive. What's on it, Silas's old tax returns? A collection of cat videos?" He doubled over, clutching his stomach, his face red with mirth, clearly delighted by what he perceived as my public embarrassment. Their laughter, sharp and derisive, pierced through me like icy needles, each peal a confirmation of my deepest insecurities, a public declaration of my insignificance. My cheeks burned, a humiliating flush spreading from my neck to my hairline. I stared at the innocuous little device, a tiny piece of plastic that suddenly felt heavier than any gold bar, a symbol of their open contempt. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the deep pile of the carpet, away from their cruel, knowing eyes. What was this? A final, twisted jest from an uncle I barely knew? Mr. Davies, however, remained unperturbed by their outburst. He let their laughter echo for a few moments, a silent, almost defiant stand. When they finally quieted, still chuckling and exchanging smug glances, he spoke again, his voice now lower, more serious, compelling attention. along with this encrypted USB drive," he stated, his gaze meeting mine directly, holding it with an intensity I hadn't expected. "Your uncle also left a sealed letter. This letter and the contents of this drive are to be considered your sole specific inheritance. And I am instructed to inform you, Logan, that unlocking its full potential will require a certain journey." The words "a certain journey" hung heavy, silencing their laughter. My gaze flickered from the USB to the sealed envelope Mr. Davies presented, my mind a strange mix of bewilderment and reluctant intrigue. A journey? My ingrained cynicism scoffed. "This is it, Logan, your grand inheritance, a final elaborate prank from an eccentric uncle." But a stubborn spark of curiosity, against all logic, refused to be extinguished. Aunt Carol, her face a mask of furious indignation, slammed a hand on the table. "A journey? Mr. Davies, this is preposterous. Silas was a man of stature, not a participant in childish charades. We have important lives. We cannot indulge in these theatrics." David, his mirth gone, scowled. "Just tell him what trinket it leads to. This is insulting." Their collective fury and sense of insult filled the room. Mr. Davies, however, remained unperturbed. He calmly extended the sealed letter to me, his gaze firm. "Your Uncle Silas anticipated such reactions," he stated, his voice carrying undeniable authority that quieted their protests. "He explicitly instructed this letter be read by you, Logan, in private after the reading. The journey is not merely metaphorical. It is a designed series of steps, a path to understand his true legacy and, perhaps, unlock your own untapped potential." His words resonated, a profound challenge. My fingers trembled as I reached for the letter, the crisp paper bearing Silas's distinctive seal, a stylized raven. A faint memory of my mother's locket sent a pang of connection. Holding it, I felt it transform into a personal cipher, a direct whisper from beyond the grave. The family's indignant murmurs and David's exasperated sighs faded into a distant hum. In that moment, amidst their scorn, a quiet resolve hardened. I would follow this cryptic path. The legal office felt colder as I finally stood to leave, the heavy weight of the USB drive and the sealed letter clutched tightly in my hand. Aunt Carol and David were still whispering, their faces contorted in a mix of indignation and baffled amusement. "He actually took it," I heard David sneer, his voice barely a murmur but amplified by my heightened senses. "Probably thinks it's a treasure map to some forgotten pennies." Their laughter, now softer, followed me, a bitter taste in my mouth, as I walked out of the opulent room, Mr. Davies offering a small, encouraging nod that was lost on the family. The street outside was a stark contrast, bustling with the indifferent rush of New York City, a cacophony of taxis, sirens, and hurried footsteps. I found a small, unassuming coffee shop a few blocks away, seeking refuge in its anonymous warmth. The aroma of roasted beans and sugar filled the air, a comforting blanket against the lingering chill of their scorn. I ordered a lukewarm coffee I didn't really want, just for the excuse to sit, my hands still faintly trembling. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, echoing the questions swirling in my mind. What was on that drive? And what journey could Silas possibly have intended? I slipped into a quiet booth in the back, the worn leather seat offering little comfort. With deliberate slowness, I pulled out the sealed letter, my fingers tracing the distinctive raven emblem. It felt strangely intimate, this last communication from a man I barely remembered, a man who, despite everything, had remembered me. The paper crackled softly as I broke the seal, a sound almost drowned out by the coffee grinder. Inside, Silas's elegant, slightly shaky handwriting filled the page, instantly recognizable from the rare birthday cards he'd sent when I was a child. "Logan," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you chose to stay, to face their scorn, and for that, I am proud. The others, they see only what's tangible, what's easily counted. But you, my boy, always had a quiet strength, a curiosity for the unseen." My throat tightened. He saw me. The simple words were a balm, a stark contrast to the derision I'd just endured. He continued, "The USB drive contains not just a legacy, but a lesson. It holds the key to a portfolio, one I began building years ago, long before the world truly understood its value. It's decentralized, anonymous, and requires a certain digital literacy." Decentralized, anonymous, digital literacy? The words swirled, forming a strange, incomprehensible puzzle. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. A portfolio? What kind of portfolio? My experience with finances extended to balancing a meager checking account. Silas, the eccentric inventor, always tinkering, always just a step ahead of everyone. Could this be one of his grand, cryptic designs? A flicker of excitement, tentative and fragile, began to push past the cynical shroud I'd worn for so long. "This is not a gift, Logan, but a test," the letter continued, his voice echoing in my mind as I read. "The journey I spoke of with Mr. Davies is real. The drive is encrypted, and its contents are locked behind a series of challenges. Clues are embedded within my old journals and a few scattered locations. Only by following these breadcrumbs, by truly engaging with the process, will you gain full access. I want you to understand the why, not just the what. This isn't just about money. It's about seeing beyond the surface, about trusting your intuition." My gaze darted back to the sleek USB drive, now feeling less like a cruel joke and more like a Pandora's box, filled with both daunting challenges and untold possibilities. A test. He wanted me to earn it. The family's laughter still echoed, but now it felt distant, muted by the growing intrigue of Silas's challenge. He was asking me to embark on a scavenger hunt, not for trinkets, but for something far more substantial, something tied to decentralized and digital literacy. The first clue, Silas's letter revealed, is in the place where we last truly connected, a place where the world felt limitless and possibilities were infinite. Look for the stargazer's lament near the old shed. My mind immediately conjured images of his remote cabin in the woods, the one with the rickety old observatory and a shed full of bizarre, half-finished inventions. A wave of nostalgia, sharp and unexpected, washed over me. A brief, warm memory of a clear night sky and Silas pointing out constellations. A faint smile touched my lips, a genuine one for the first time that day. He hadn't forgotten our shared love for the stars, our secret world of wonder. My earlier anger and humiliation began to recede, replaced by a surge of purpose. This wasn't about Aunt Carol or David's scorn. This was about Silas and me, a final intricate game between an eccentric uncle and the nephew he believed in. My fingers tightened around the USB drive, a sudden warmth emanating from the small, cold object. The journey was indeed real, and it had already begun. I took a deep breath, the scent of coffee grounds and sugar filling my lungs. The weight of the task felt heavy, but it was a welcome weight, a challenge that felt uniquely mine. The world outside the coffee shop, once a blur of indifference, now held a new, sharper focus. I had a direction, a purpose, and a whisper from a forgotten past telling me, "You are more than they believe." The coffee shop's comforting aroma began to feel stifling, a stark contrast to the crisp, fresh air I knew awaited me at Silas's cabin. Leaving the city was a decision made with surprising ease, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The hum of the city faded behind me as the Greyhound bus devoured miles, exchanging skyscrapers for rolling hills and then eventually dense forests. Each mile carried me further from the lawyer's office, further from Aunt Carol's sneer and David's derisive laughter, closer to a past I'd almost forgotten, a past that now held the promise of an unknown future. The landscape outside the window blurred, an abstract painting of greens and browns, each tree a silent sentinel guarding the secrets of the earth. I remembered the drive well, even after all these years. It was a winding, often unpaved road that seemed to shed civilization with every curve. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp scent of pine and rich, fertile soil. My phone signal dwindled, then vanished entirely, plunging me into a silence I hadn't realized I craved. It was a profound quiet, broken only by the hum of the bus and the rustle of my own thoughts. This journey wasn't just physical. It was a descent into a deeply personal space, a space where Silas's eccentric spirit still lingered. I clutched the USB drive and the letter in my backpack, their presence a constant, tangible reminder of my new purpose. When the bus finally dropped me off at the nearest small town, a place barely a dot on the map, a sense of deep solitude settled over me. There were no taxis, no Ubers, just the tired eyes of a general store clerk and the endless stretch of road. I walked, the dirt path leading me deeper into the woods, the backpack heavy on my shoulders. The cabin eventually appeared, nestled amongst towering pines, exactly as I remembered it. Weathered wood, a porch swing creaking faintly in the breeze, and the distinct, slightly metallic smell of the old observatory dome jutting from the roof. It looked smaller now, perhaps, but just as infused with Silas's quiet, brilliant energy. Pushing open the front door, the scent of dust, aged paper, and something faintly herbal, Silas's pipe tobacco, perhaps, enveloped me. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long, dancing shadows across the sparsely furnished living room. Everything was just as he'd left it. Stacks of books on every surface, half-finished contraptions shrouded in drop cloths, a telescope pointing vaguely towards the heavens. It wasn't a house. It was a workshop, a sanctuary of ideas. A wave of unexpected emotion washed over me, a strange mix of sorrow for his passing and a powerful connection to his enduring spirit. So, this is where it begins, I whispered into the stillness, my voice swallowed by the quiet. My eyes gravitated towards the back door, leading to the shed, the immediate destination Silas had pointed me towards, the stargazer's lament. What could that mean? The phrase itself felt poetic, a typical Silas puzzle. I remembered spending hours with him in that shed as a kid, watching him tinker with motors and lenses, explaining the universe in ways that made my young mind sing. He'd always said the stars were a language, and the lament perhaps was a missing piece, a silent cry of understanding. The thought brought a wistful smile to my face. The shed door creaked open with a groan that echoed in the night. Inside, it was a cavern of tools, half-finished projects, and the distinct smell of sawdust and old oil. Lantern light, which I'd brought from the cabin, cut through the gloom, illuminating shelves crammed with labeled jars, coils of wire, and strange, intricate gears. My gaze swept over everything, searching for anything out of place, anything that might be described as a lament or linked to stargazing. It felt like stepping into his mind, navigating the labyrinth of his genius. "Okay, Silas," I murmured, my voice a soft offering to the silence. "You always liked a good riddle." "Stargazer's lament, near the old shed. What did you mean?" I ran my hand along a dusty workbench, my fingers brushing against forgotten screws and fragments of wood. My mind raced, trying to recall specific conversations, specific objects from my childhood visits. He'd often spoken of the lament of distant stars, the light taking so long to reach us that the stars themselves might already be gone. It was a melancholy thought, a beautiful one. I moved around the small space, my steps cautious, trying not to disturb the delicate balance of his organized chaos. Near the back wall, where the shed leaned slightly, there was an old wooden crate, half buried under a pile of canvas. I pulled away the heavy fabric, revealing familiar faded paint. It was the crate he used to store his earliest, clumsiest telescope parts, the ones he'd built with me when I was too young to truly help, but old enough to listen. Its worn surface felt rough beneath my fingertips, a palpable connection to a shared past. Carefully, I opened the crate. Inside, nestled amongst old blueprints and a few rusted tools, was a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with a stylized constellation, and its pages were thin and brittle with age. This had to be it. My heart gave a sudden, hopeful leap. The journal lay there, a silent testament to a life lived in wonder, a life I was now unexpectedly retracing. The scent of old paper filled my nostrils, a different kind of perfume than the city, a scent of discovery. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up, feeling the weight of years, of Silas's thoughts within its pages. It wasn't just a journal. It was a direct line to him, a whisper from the past, exactly as his letter had promised. This was the first breadcrumb, a tangible piece of the certain journey he had laid out. The silence of the shed no longer felt empty, but filled with the profound presence of my uncle, waiting for me to turn the page. The laughter of my family in that lawyer's office seemed an age away, a faded echo against the stark, beautiful reality of this moment. With a deep breath, I carefully opened the journal. Its brittle pages creaked, revealing Silas's familiar erratic script, a mix of astrophysics, diagrams, and fragmented code. I quickly found December 12th, the lament of the celestial hunter. This was it, the first breadcrumb. My eyes immediately fell upon a poem, short and enigmatic, where the hunter weeps for stars unseen, and silence reigns where life has been. The shadow speaks, the echo calls, beyond the reach of ancient walls. Seek the source where light is born, and from the dark a truth is torn. A poem? I whispered, a half-laugh escaping. Of course, Silas, you wouldn't make it easy. My mind raced, each line a new riddle that made my head throb. This wasn't just a treasure hunt, it was a battle of wits, and I already felt utterly outmatched. Further down, a bold passage spoke directly. Logan, this path demands persistence. The portfolio isn't simple. It's decentralized assets, protected by algorithms and private keys. This journal provides foundational understanding. Once you grasp digital seed, proceed to the next clue, hidden where the hunter truly weeps, not for absence, but for a reflection. Digital seed, private keys. The jargon was utterly foreign. I was a freelance graphic designer, not a cryptographer. A cold wave of doubt washed over me. Could I do this? Was Silas's faith misplaced? The memory of Aunt Carol and David's scorn flickered. Yet, a stubborn spark ignited. Silas had believed. I owed it to him and myself to try. I spent the next hour hunched by the lantern, absorbing Silas's notes on blockchain and seed phrases. The digital seed, he'd written, is the origin point, the cosmic dust from which all wealth grows. Protect it with your life. It was complex, yet compelling. So, the Stargazer's Lament isn't just a poem, I murmured. It's about the origin, the digital seed, and where the hunter truly weeps for a reflection. My gaze drifted to the shed's dusty window, catching my own faint image. It must be tied to the beginning of this digital wealth. But where, Silas? Where do I find this reflection? The quiet shed now hummed with a heavy, thrilling promise. I closed the journal, placing the USB drive on its cover. The weight of the task settled on me, heavy but exhilarating. This first riddle, seemingly simple, already felt like the tip of a vast, complex iceberg. I was ready, a peculiar mix of terror and excitement, to dive deeper into Silas's digital cosmos. The night air grew colder, but a new warmth spread, fueled by an unfamiliar purpose. The phrase, where the hunter truly weeps, not for absence, but for a reflection, echoed in the quiet shed, a riddle both frustrating and strangely poignant. I stared at my own faint image in the dusty window pane, the lantern light behind me casting my silhouette against the night. Was it truly that simple? A literal reflection? No. Silas was never one for the obvious. His puzzles always peeled back layers, revealing deeper truths. The hunter was clearly a reference to Orion, the constellation Silas had loved so fiercely, the one he'd called the celestial hunter in his journal. And Orion's lament, he often said, wasn't for the stars he saw, but for the impossible vastness of what remained unseen. But a reflection? Not just of stars, but of himself. My uncle had always been deeply introspective, his brilliance often cloaked in a quiet melancholy. He saw the universe as a mirror, reflecting our own questions, our own insignificance, our own potential. The digital seed he'd written was the cosmic dust from which all wealth grows. Cosmic dust, the beginning of everything. What if the reflection wasn't a physical place at all, but a moment of creation, a moment where the digital seed was first conceptualized, first reflected into existence? My mind latched onto the idea, a sudden surge of adrenaline tightening my chest. I picked up the journal again, flipping through the earliest entries. Sure enough, tucked within the first few pages, a date stood out. October 26th. Below it, scribbled notes detailing his first forays into blockchain technology, crude diagrams of what he called distributed ledgers, and a fervent, almost manic declaration: the true wealth lies not in accumulation, but in the generative power of the seed. This is the origin, the first breath of a new world. This was it. This date, this moment of conceptual birth, was the reflection he meant. It was the point where the hunter, Silas, wept, not for what was lost, but for the profound beauty and terrifying potential of what he had just created. "It's not a place, is it, Silas?" I whispered, my voice thick with understanding. "It's a time, a beginning." The shed suddenly felt less like a dusty storage room and more like a sacred chamber, holding the genesis of something monumental. The cold air no longer seemed to bite. Instead, it invigorated, sharpening my senses. My fingers ran over the date, October 26th, on the page. It was a date I didn't recognize as significant in my childhood memories, but clearly, for Silas, it had been a turning point, a moment of profound, almost spiritual insight. His notes described the initial setup of a Genesis wallet, the very first digital container for his crypto assets. He emphasized the importance of a recovery phrase, a sequence of words that was the ultimate key, the digital seed itself. "This phrase," he'd penned, "is more vital than any bank vault. It is a poem of power, an incantation. Remember the language of the stars, Logan. They whisper their truths." My heart pounded. The poem in the journal, the one I'd dismissed as merely atmospheric, began to reform in my mind, each line taking on a startling new significance. Where the hunter weeps for stars unseen, the vast unknown potential of the blockchain, yet to be fully realized. And silence reigns, where life has been. The initial void before the digital creation, the anonymity of the nascent network. The shadow speaks, the echo calls. The decentralized, immutable record, a digital echo of every transaction, beyond the reach of ancient walls, beyond traditional financial systems. Seek the source where light is born, the Genesis wallet. And from the dark, a truth is torn. The recovery phrase, hidden in plain sight within his lyrical prose. The realization hit me like a jolt of pure energy. The poem was the recovery phrase, or at least a highly encrypted version of it, cleverly disguised, woven into the very fabric of his poetic lament. Silas hadn't just hidden the clue in his journal, he'd encoded the solution within the very text of the poem. My uncle, the brilliant eccentric, had turned poetry into a password, a testament to his unique genius. A genuine smile, wide and unburdened, stretched across my face. The weight of the world, of Aunt Carol's sneers and David's mockery, vanished. This was the game, the intricate dance he had intended. I quickly reread the poem, my eyes now searching for keywords, for a specific pattern, for the language of the stars he had alluded to. It wasn't about the individual words, but their sequence, their rhythm, their emotional weight. I could almost hear his voice, a low chuckle encouraging me. This was the reflection, not of a place but of his mind, his brilliance, his deep desire for me to truly see beyond the obvious. It was a reflection of the trust he'd placed in me, in my ability to unravel his final, greatest puzzle. The shed, once a place of musty tools, now glowed with the light of this profound connection. The language of the stars, it wasn't just a metaphor for cosmic truths, but for the inherent elegant structure within the poem itself. Silas had designed it to be both art and algorithm. My fingers flew across the worn keys of his old dusty laptop, which I'd found beneath a pile of blueprints in the cabin. The USB drive, a sleek shard of obsidian, hummed faintly as I inserted it. Guided by Silas's meticulous notes in the journal, I navigated through the encrypted folders, my heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Each word of the poem, carefully selected, became a part of the passphrase, a sequence I typed with a precision I didn't know I possessed. The silence in the shed was absolute, punctuated only by the soft click of keys and my own ragged breathing. Then, a green light flashed on the screen. A new window opened, stark white against the dark interface. "Welcome, Logan," it read, in Silas's distinctive font. Below it, a series of glowing digits, shifting and dancing, began to populate the screen. My eyes widened, a gasp catching in my throat. It was a digital ledger, an undeniable, tangible record. And at the top, bold and impossible, was the current valuation, a staggering $15,000. My vision blurred, the numbers swimming before me, $15 million, all in a decentralized, anonymous cryptocurrency portfolio. I slumped back against the workbench, the old wood groaning under my weight. "Silas," I whispered, the name thick with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You actually did it." The laughter of Aunt Carol and David echoed in my mind, but it was hollow now, distant, like ghosts from another life. Their scorn, their derision, their absolute certainty of my insignificance, it all evaporated in the face of this impossible shining truth. This wasn't just money, it was vindication. It was Silas's final, magnificent gesture, a testament to his belief in me, a belief no one else had shared. "This is not a gift, Logan, but a test." His words from the letter reverberated, now imbued with profound meaning. He hadn't just wanted to leave me wealth, he wanted me to discover my own capacity, to prove that I could see beyond the surface, beyond what was easily dismissed. The intricate puzzle, the journey through his mind, had transformed me. I wasn't the same man who had walked into that lawyer's office, shoulders hunched, heart heavy with expectation and dread. I was a man who had earned his inheritance, not just received it. A profound quiet settled in the shed, a deep silence that wasn't empty but full of promise. The glowing screen was a beacon in the dimness, a striking image of a new dawn. It wasn't about the raw sum, but the profound shift it represented, the freedom, the endless possibilities. My past struggles, my ramen noodle existence, faded into the background, becoming mere footnotes in a story that had suddenly exploded into vibrant, unpredictable chapters. The world, once a maze of limitations, now felt limitless. A faint smile touched my lips, a genuine one that stretched deep into my soul. I could almost feel Silas's presence, a gentle, fading whisper in the pine-scented air. He wasn't truly gone. His legacy lived on, not just in the digital fortune, but in the transformation he'd sparked within me. The echoes of his brilliance filled the shed, a tangible force. He had shown me that true value isn't always obvious, isn't always paraded for all to see. It's often hidden, waiting to be unearthed by those with the courage to look beyond the ordinary. The journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. The screen continued to glow, a silent testament to a future that, just hours ago, had been unimaginable. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle. The shed, once a dusty storage space, had become a crucible, forging a new path. And as I opened my eyes, looking at the flickering numbers, I knew one universal truth. Some legacies aren't found in grand estates or antique watches, but in the quiet, unexpected whispers that change everything.